This is True North Story, the original podcast series. Learn, love, listen, live. Are you ready to discover your True North Story? With your hosts, Tama Fulton and John Hudson Messerol.
Your book is absolutely amazing, I want to say.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for reading it.
Oh, my goodness.
I'm glad you liked it.
I did. I did.
So nice to hear.
Yeah, I did. I call your poetry and your blog edible because you make words seem like you just want to eat them because they just are so dense and full of delightful texture and content.
Gosh,
Tell us a little.
Thank you so much.
Oh, well, it's very true.
So great.
Just would love to hear how you decided or discovered that writing was kind of your thing.
Before I could even write, and I think I don't know, I was 5 or something, and I remember my mother writing down these poems that I would make up, and they were so completely silly and rhymed, and she wrote them down, and I felt like, oh, okay, well, this is special, enough that my mom thought to write them down. I'm grateful for her. And then I made, like a lot of kids do, little books out of their stories. I mean, I think a lot of kids do that. And so I loved writing stories. And that was once I could write, I guess. And then in the second grade, I think I was such an introvert. And I don't know if my writing was good enough that the teacher thought to encourage me to stay inside at recess and write a short story that they could enter in this contest. But I did that, and I ended up winning and getting this medal. It was sponsored by Caldecott or something. It was special, and I felt that, maybe it was kind of like a meeting of what I like to do, and then being recognized for it made me feel like I could possibly write something people might want to read. And then in college, I studied theater at UCLA, but I found poetry. They had a wonderful teacher. Stevie was one. He's a poet, studied and was friends with James Merrill for all of his life. So there was this kind of lineage with the poetry. I fell in love with poetry. I ended up getting a master's degree in poetry. So it was kind of interesting that fiction, it's the first book that I've put out, was Further Out Than You Thought, and it's a novel. It seemed like I needed the novel form to tell the story that was so close to my heart and that I had to tell first. I think I had to tell that story in a way that I could let it out into the world before I could tell any other story.
There's poetry woven into the fabric of your novel, too.
There is. I mean, I think it kind of had to be in there. And then there's the Stevie Smith poem also in the middle there.
Stevie she's a lover of poems, and she takes her stage name after, the poet. And
right, the poet Stevie Smith.
So talk a little bit about Stevie and who Stevie is to you, or who she became as you were writing.
Yes. Well, story of Further Out it's close to my heart, and it's also close in a lot of ways to my life. I was in LA during the 1992 riots, which play a big part in the book. And then I also worked as a stripper for a time in LA with the idea that at some point I would write about it. And Stevie was actually my dancer name too, which was taken from Stevie Smith. Stevie, the character, I wrote the book first as a memoir. Actually, at first it was a thinly disguised novel, and then it was complete memoir. And then the third and final version was really fiction, and I did fictionalize it because when I worked as a stripper, it was 1994, so it was after the riots. It wasn't at the same time. But I got pregnant at the end of the stripping stint that I did. It was about 6 months, and becoming pregnant changed the course of my life. And the stripping, though, and Stevie's character, because she is a writer in graduate school and with a guy she's been with and who she loves, but she knows it's probably not going to go anywhere, too. Wanting him to be more grown up than he is. He's a Leo, Peter Pan character who doesn't really want to grow up. But all the characters and further out came to LA with that dream, I think, of finding their voice. Because the two men, Leo and then Valiant, who is their friend, came for music. And then Stevie came for the acting, but then she's found writing, and the stripping is, she loves to dance also. It's kind of a place where she's found food for her writing also.
You know, like a lot of musicians or people in the arts, they kind of find alternative ways to pay the bills while they're pursuing their art.
To do what they love to do.
Exactly. Tell me what LA was like, the art scene was like when you were being a grad school student and working, and what was it like in 1992 in LA? Can you describe it a little bit?
You know, there was a great music scene. It was a kind of a nightclub spot called Cafe Largo where Valiant, but based on my friend Valor, played. I was one of his go-go dancers.
You're kidding.
And Leo, who was based on my boyfriend at the time, played keyboard. But it was really kind of old style, like a dark club. And there was dinner. You could have dinner there, too. And it was pretty fantastic. But we lived in the Miracle Mile area. I don't know if you've been there, but the apartment buildings were really very posh in the 30s. And they're all different styles. At the time, in Mid-Wilshire, bordered some pretty sketchy areas. And, like, I remember Kurt being held up at gunpoint at one point for the cash in his pocket, which he gave whoever it was, definitely. But it was sort of on the edge, and there were some great coffee shops. And then in the strip club scene, there was a lot of Nirvana being played and that kind of music. It was a good place to be in your early 20s. Not a place you'd want to raise a kid in, definitely.
And your life has changed so drastically from those days. I mean, what catapulted you to becoming a professor and living kind of in a small town and away from the bright lights in the big city of LA?
My boyfriend and I used to go down to San Clemente a lot. He had grown up there, and San Clemente is in the book, too. And kind of at the end, it's sort of an opening. I know some people have described further out than you thought as feeling very claustrophobic, since it takes place during the 3 days during the riots, you know? Mm-hmm. But I felt claustrophobic in LA also, just how it spreads out for endlessly, kind of that city.
Yeah, it just never ends.
It never ends, and in San Clemente, it felt like it finally ended. I think a lot of LA came once we left San Clemente. But anyhow, now I'm in Prescott, which partly it was because my relationship was ending at that point, and I needed family support. But also, I wanted a place that my two kids could grow up, where it's a small town, there's a little square. It was the first capital in Arizona, and they could ride their bikes. There's a park around the corner, and it's just easy, I think. And there's a lot of nature. There's skiing that's only 5 minutes away, mountain biking, and you can breathe. I think I wanted a place with more trees than people. And it's really, I know I couldn't live in a city again after being here. And then getting to teach at Yavapai College, and Prescott College is a little liberal arts college in town. There's just so many wonderful people here, too. There's a great sense of community, and I'm really happy here. I'm happy in my life.
My co-host here, John, is a writer as well. And John, I mean, maybe you and Michaela can speak to just the whole idea of the writing and creating and character development.
Right. Well, and that's why I was going to ask. It sounds like there's a lot of you in the character of Stevie. Maybe you can walk us through that process as a fellow writer. Our own personal life experience manifests itself in characters that we develop, or things that we have experienced personally, or people we have known that come in and out of our lives that get woven into that story. Walk us through that process a little bit, because I think it's cathartic in some ways to work through that. and and put it down in the written word. So just kind of walk us through that a little bit about how you let in your own life into your storytelling and how you work through that process.
It took me a long time to write this book, and I had said it took, I had 2 other full drafts of what I thought at that time that it would be, kind of. And the first was very close to the actual people. I feel like it was more like a Jack Kerouac, just changing the names sort of a thing.
Right, sure.
And then the next version was a memoir, so I was really trying to get at kind of the core, and it was maybe more focused around me too, and like how all of this played into my life. Then this, and because I did those versions, I felt like I could throw them away, like, okay, I've done that. Now this one, I really wanted to tell a good story, and the people who I loved, because I feel like it really is my best version I could do of a love song to that time in my life, my early 20s and the early 90s. And my friend Valor, who's valiant in the book, he died of AIDS in 95, and I felt like I really wanted to capture some of the quality of our moments together in the book. But at the same time, what helped me a lot was setting it during the riots. So it takes place in 5 days during the 92 riots in LA. They go to Tijuana and go to San Clemente also. But just changing, like having that limit for myself and focus on the heart of the story, and the characters could transform quicker than they did in life also,
It's like having almost a self-imposed timeline, right?
Right.
I mean, which for writers, I think that's one of the greatest fears. It's like, well, where do I start and where do I end? I have a story to tell, but how do I tell it, right? It's so vast or it's so big, or it seems so overwhelming and daunting.
Challenging, maybe to narrow it, focus it,
Sure.
Because it could go on forever, right? But pretty boring. So that helped a lot. And then allowing the characters to speak for themselves and to change, because all of the characters are truly characters. They were based on people, but they became themselves in the writing of the book.
Right. But that comes from you, too, because you knew them.
Right. As writers are parts of us, doesn't it?
Well, exactly. And that's what I was going to ask another quick question about, how you deal with vulnerability and weaving that. You mentioned being on the stage and pursuing theater at UCLA, and because I am also a theater person myself, and I think that's helped tremendously in allowing myself to be more vulnerable in my writing. And you mentioned stripping, which is a really vulnerable profession for some.
Definitely.
And so talk to me about how you wove in the vulnerabilities, not only in your own life into the story, but into the characters that you created, which makes them more real.
Yeah, well, they're all flawed. They're deeply flawed characters. And I think embracing that and trying to tell a true story, not hiding. I think you're right. Acting helps. I mean, because you have to bury yourself to be true. And then you find that people relate to that. And I think also as a teacher of writing, I have found that the more vulnerable someone is in their work, the more I want to read it. So, that seeing that, my favorite class that I've taught at Yavapai College was Writing and Healing, and that focused entirely on digging way down to those really deep stories that might be hard to tell friends, but you maybe need to tell. And it didn't focus at all on craft. And I was always amazed because what people wrote was some of the best stuff I've read in any of the classes. So I think that is so important to remember. And even when stories we're telling maybe aren't as autobiographical, still getting to that vulnerability and that place in each character that we write about, that all people feel, but we
Right.
don't.
I have a very good friend who is an amazing actor, and he studied under Uta Hagen in New York for a while. And I remember the first time I worked with him on stage, and he used to tell me what Uta Hagen would always tell him, and she'd be like, Jimmy, don't you ever tell lies. The audience will find you out. And,
I like that.
And so I think the same thing applies to writing, which is what you just said. If you're using cliches, if you're creating characters that aren't based in vulnerabilities or realities or flaws, as you alluded to earlier, you're telling lies, and your audience and your reader will find out, and it won't be anywhere near as good as it could be.
Absolutely. That's a great thing to remember.
I love that we know that we're all have flaws, that we're not perfect. We often put on inauthentic masks, if you will,
right.
to try and better ourselves or make ourselves appear to be something that we're not. But you're right, Michaela, we're most relatable when we don't have that mask on.
It could be scary.
You're right.
Yeah, what I was going to say is I feel like poetry somehow helped with that also because since it is so crafted, it was a way, at least in college, that I felt like I could express these deep things I was feeling, but it was somehow okay. I mean, it's terrifying to read a poem you've written for the first time out loud to a class, your peers, but because you spend so much time kind of working on each line, it somehow felt okay to do that. And I was thinking also of Sylvia Plath, such a, I think college students everywhere still love her because she was searching for that authentic self. And gosh, she sure wasn't telling any lies.
No, she was very raw, wasn't she?
Yes, yeah.
This is True North Story, the original podcast series, meant to inspire, encourage, motivate, and offer hope. And now, back to the program.
You had referred the mask, and I just had a thought when you were talking about dancing earlier, and how much of that was you, how much of that was you maybe playing a role on stage of being somebody else, and then was the poetry and the writing a byproduct of you kind of being yourself or expressing yourself off stage versus when you were on stage and playing Stevie the dancer versus Michaela when you're at home with your friends?
The idea of the mask and persona.
Right.
It was definitely a character. There is a passage in the book where Stevie is driving home and she becomes Gwen, that's her real name. As she's driving, she's reminding herself who she actually is. And I think that is the danger in ways of kind of playing with that sort of fire,
Right.
How much do you take into your personal life and really keeping certain aspects at the club, and yet as you get to know people, regulars, other dancers, there were times when I could be probably more truthful with some of them than other people in my life, and especially as the longer you do it, I only danced about 6 months, but it starts to become your life. And then you're keeping that secret from people, I didn't tell my parents, or people in my family. So then it becomes like the life you're living, your real life is kind of a lie. And you can be more truthful with these other people. But it definitely started as a mask and as a way, I think, to come to terms with my own sexuality in ways. And after being an actress, where you're out, you're on the stage, you get feedback, and then going to writing, because I got my degree from Warren Wilson for my master's, and it was a distance program. So I was doing a lot of work just on my own. Yeah, and writing is so isolating anyhow that I felt like I was kind of imploding. So stripping was a way to express myself. There are people there, and like the polar opposite in some ways of writing. Also, you're silent, right? You're just dancing. And writing is really so And I think I needed that balance to kind of ground myself in my body. I was able to embrace being pregnant then, too, as your body's changing and all that. But I felt so in touch with my body through the dancing. That transition felt natural. And I guess having embraced it, because I think so many women don't embrace their bodies and don't feel comfortable. I felt at the point where I stopped, I felt really comfortable in my body.
That's funny.
Something.
But you're right. I totally agree with you as a woman that the more comfortable that you are with yourself, the easier it is to express yourself in any fashion. Mm-hmm. And I think, too, that dancing is just, if you are comfortable with yourself, it's just a natural expression of who you are for other people to see in a nonverbal way. And and it can be so beautiful and it can be so freeing as a dancer. Did you find that it was very freeing for you?
I did. Really freeing, too, because of the sexual dynamics, I guess, with the people who come into the club, men, of course, some women, which I loved. It's so clear in ways. It's upfront. Whereas in life, those dynamics, different jobs I had, being kind of hit on or sort of sexually harassed or something, but you can't. How do you bring that out in the open? Or you can't call, it's all that innuendo and little things where at the club it was just all out there.
It was probably feeling powerful too.
It was, yes. Like you have to be in your power, or then because there is the other side, and it could be seen as degrading. Or there were some women too who it was like they're maybe one of the only things that they felt that they could do at that point, and that was hard to see, whereas others were clearly in control of what they were doing. I mean, it's all so much gray, just not black and white at all. Definitely feeling in your power on stage is a kind of a thrilling thing, and also hard to give it up in that way. So I was very happy that I got pregnant and made a choice and left. I think it can be a hard one if maybe it goes on too long.
Well, in some ways, it's not that dissimilar from performing on stage in a theater, right? You get on stage and every room, every theater breathes, and that audience gives you feedback. Even though it's nonverbal, you can feel it, energy. As a performer on stage, you feed off of that. And there are nights when you go on stage and the audience is really, really good. And there are nights when they are deader than dead, and you're like, wow, I've really got to carry this because they're not going to help me. And so, right?
They're dead.
It's like, is there anybody home? Is the one dude in the back corner there even alive? Is he asleep? What's going on? And, and I'm assuming that being on stage is a little even more energy filled than that, because there is what you are doing is even more emotionally, sexually, physically charged than somebody performing a play on stage.
A part you've made, kind of.
Right, but there's boundaries there too, right? So, the safety aspect of there's limits and boundaries to what is acceptable behavior within a club, I would assume.
Exactly, yeah, and the
bouncers and things like that.
Kind of going into it with that you have to, at least I wanted to have very clear to not get kind of sucked into this other kind of the underworld,
It's really interesting because I thought you were talking about how different writing is and then performance art, let's say. And I remember a writing teacher telling me very early on in my career saying that writing is a solitary profession. And I just, I let that sit and kind of sink in for a little bit. And it is. It takes place in your head. It is arguments within your own head. It's characters talking within your own head. It's narrative in your own head. It's telling a story and weaving it together, but it's all in your head, and it's all done by yourself. You can have editors, and you can have helpers, and you can run ideas by people, but ultimately you're the one putting pen to paper or finger to keyboard. Is that kind of how you balance the solitary part of the writing with more of the interaction and the attention and the feedback on the performance side of things. So they kind of balanced out.
I think it is really essential as a writer to have a community, even if it's not a community of writers. It can be just community, just people that you can actually interact with, and then also to have something to write about too. What it made me think of when you were saying this is how a lot of teaching now and learning is going online. So I've been teaching poetry through Yavapai College now about 5 years online only for enrollment purposes and all these reasons they want to just have it online. But I so miss the interaction with people. My partner and I have an independent bookstore in Prescott right now, and it's just so wonderful to be there, and the people who come in looking for books, and that kind of community is really important to me now.
Tim and I talk about this all the time, this millennial generation, and how disconnected they are from interpersonal communication. And how is that going to play out 20 years from now?
Gosh, I really wonder.
I know, it's kind of scary, right? I mean,
it is. It's a little scary.
It's like, don't you want to live your life a little bit without the machines?
Right. Go hang out with friends in person and get out in nature. So I know I've really been trying to leave the computer, leave the phone, go out and just like we forget what that's like now. Even us. I mean, I'm going to be 50 soon enough. We grew up without it. But now I feel like we all need it. It's fear of not having your phone with you.
Right.
It's a real thing. My kids are 21 and 17 right now. They grew up. Yeah.
Starting to make a life for themselves.
You're working on a new book?
I am.
Can you tell anything about it yet?
Yes, I feel like I can because I have a complete rough draft, first draft, and I am going back through it now. I got some notes from my agent, and I'm back in the middle of it. But it's very different. It's historical fiction, and the working title is The Degenerate, but it's looking at the surrealist artists in France at the beginning of World War II, specifically at Max Ernst and Leonora Carrington. They were madly in love, and he's taken away because he's a German to an internment camp in France. They interned the Germans like how we in the United States interned the Japanese. And she loses her mind when she's alone after he's gone. And so it's their love story, but there's a lot of, all of the surrealists kind of make their way into the story. And it's been such a blast getting to research.
Oh, I bet.
People. I went to Paris maybe 3 years ago thinking it was one of the earlier versions of what I was writing, which became this book. I was writing more of just a pure fiction, and then I came across these characters, and I thought, okay, as frightened as I am to write any real person's story, it was just too intriguing to pass up.
Right.
So I dove in, even with all of my fears.
I went to a seminar, a speakers conference here, and got to hear Andrew Dorr talk.
Oh
my
wow.
word! I mean, and talk about amazing research. I mean, he will go to vintage places and buy actual pieces that belong to that time, and so he knows completely if he's talking about someone carrying a suitcase. How heavy was it? What were the diameters of it?
Yeah,
what
have
did
you read All the Light?
I have started it. I haven't finished it.
The writing is just so gorgeous. I loved it.
Yes. Yeah. So there you go. There's some amazing historical fiction for you.
Such an inspiration.
What do you think the single biggest influence in who you are today through your life and your journey, and kind of what is the one thing that keeps coming back to you or keeps guiding or keeps helping you in some way, some meaningful way to accomplish all the amazing things that you've accomplished?
Partly there's some great quotes. Can I say a few quotes that inspire me?
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, there's Martha Graham, the choreographer and dancer, American dancer, anyhow. She has this wonderful quote that I've shared with my writing students, but it always inspires me, especially when I'm feeling, gosh, it's so easy to feel like, how many books are there in the world? And how does the world really need any more books? Especially when you're spending all this time alone and saying no to people to do things, or you're not out on a hike or something because you're working. So her quote is, there is a vitality, a life force, an energy, a quickening that is translated through you into action. And because there is only one of you in all of time, this expression is unique. And if you block it, it will never exist through any other medium, and it will be lost. The world will not have it. And then she says it is not your business to determine how good it is or how valuable or like to compare it to others, but you just have to keep yourself open and to keep that channel open and be aware of the urges that motivate you. And then she says there is no satisfaction whatsoever at any time, that no artist is ever pleased, which I love because I think you can be pleased with something you've just written, but then when you read it back after a while, you're usually like, there's some problems. It's all a work in progress. But she says there's only this divine dissatisfaction. There's a blessed unrest that keeps us alive and marching and like kind of more alive than anyone who's not an artist, which I think is kind of true. If you stay in tune with that, you're a little bit more alive than you would be otherwise. And also, I think if I'm not writing, I get really crabby and I'm awful to be around. So I think that more than anything has kept me going. And then the other quote, but it's for Carlos Castaneda. He says, anything is one of a million paths. Therefore, you must always keep in mind that a path is only a path. And if you feel you should not follow it, then get off the path. And that the one question you should ask yourself is, does this path have a heart? And if it doesn't, then you should feel free to leave it. Because I feel like that's the other thing that, I've been teaching college for a long time, and I'm scared to not be teaching anymore. But then I'm excited what will open up. And I hope to teach through other venues. That, I think, ability to let go of the known when it isn't really inspiring you. For the unknown, yep, that's it.
So be vulnerable, I think, is maybe a good motto for you, Michaela.
I like that. Yes, I like that. It's good to be vulnerable.
Where can people find out more about you and your book?
I have a website, and it's michaelacarter.com.
Well, thanks so much for sharing your story with us and your book, Further Out Than You Thought. And
thank you so much, Emma and John. It's been a pleasure getting to talk with you. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. We have enjoyed it tremendously. Thanks for sharing some of your life and your journey and your True North story with us.
It's been a blast.
Thank you for listening to True North Story, the series. Follow us on Twitter @True North Story. And tune in next time for another True North Story.